but I don't need a real tally or anything being put on YouTube. That would be terrific. If there's any reason anybody has anything to bring up before we start? Seeing none. So I will open the executive session on House Bill 118.
114.
Yeah, I'm not going by the schedule. I'm
We're doing the hearing?
I'm doing my thing. If I can find the paperwork for my thing. All right. Opening exec session on House Bill 118. Representative Sheehan moves ought to pass. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Representative Verville. I'm sorry, Turcott. Would you, Representative Sheehan, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move amendment 0882H.
Would you like to hand out amendments?
Yes, I would.
02? Thank you. Thank you. The bill is open for further amendment. We have in front of us amendment to House Bill 118, and that is 0882H. Representative Sheehan.
Yes, a few weeks ago, we heard a non-germane amendment to HB 118 that replaced all of the bill language and replaced it with a number of committees and commissions to be repealed. This new amendment is basically the same, except we are not repealing the Child Care Commission. We are simply just removing the legislative members, the House and Senate members, so that the council can continue as it has been.
Thank you, Representative Sheehan. Any further conversation? Representative Wall.
Given the discussion we had, I thought, try again. Given the discussion that we had before in committee and since among members, I think this is a good amendment and it's very much needed, and I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wall. Any further conversation, discussion? Seeing none, when the clerk's ready, I'll ask to call the roll. We are voting on the ought to pass as amended. Actually, we're voting on the amendment for ought to pass only. Got that? Amendment 0882H. Clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chair Sheehan.
Yes.
Representative Turcott.
Yes.
Representative Verville.
yes.
Representative Boyd.
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Barton.
Yes.
Representative Wall.
Yes.
Representative Richards.
Yes.
Representative Pyre.
Yes.
Representative Fox.
Yes.
Representative Wade.
Yes.
And the chair.
Chair votes yes. I believe that's unanimous.
Yes. 12 yay, 0 nay.
So that means we now move to ought to pass as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk when he is ready to call the roll.
Vice Chair Sheehan.
Yes.
Representative Turcott.
Yes.
Representative Verville.
Yes.
Representative Boyd.
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Barton.
Yes.
Representative Wall.
Yes.
Representative Richards,
Yes.
Representative Pyer,
Yes.
Representative Fox,
Yes.
Representative Wade,
Yes.
and the chair.
Chair votes yes.
12 yeas, 0 nay.
Do I hear any objection to consent? Seeing none. House Bill 1118 will be on consent. And I'll close the exec session on 118. Next will be House Bill 142 as soon as we reset. Okay, opening up the executive session on House Bill 114. Representative Boyd moves ITL. Is there a
Mr.
second?
Chairman, you mean 142?
What did I say? 142. House Bill 142. Representative Boyd moves ITL. He just panicked down there when I called the wrong number. Is there a second on that ITL motion?
Second.
Seconded by Representative Sheehan. Representative Boyd, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, thank you.
I will correct a statement I made earlier about it. I believe I was under the impression that the Constitution talks about this Gold Star Mother's Day. This now says that it's actually RSA 4:13H that does that. So if we look at, and I wish I had made a copy of all of this, but RSA lists all of the different events that the executive branch does for every event you can possibly think of. From the birthdays of all of our branches, military branches, the governor does the proclamation for that. Also mentioned in that is the actual proclamation that the governor shall do for Gold Star Mother's Day. In the section that deals with the birthdays of the military branches, it actually speaks to the shall have the flag flown over the State House or on the State House complex. So there would be no reason why anyone couldn't request a similar proclamation from the governor. And that seems to be the correct way to handle this, is to have the governor make a proclamation of it being Gold Star Mother's Day and have flags flown or whatever else she would like to have done. So rather than us putting it in statute and handling it separately, it's already in statute, but it's under the executive branch. So that seems to be the best way to do it. Is there further conversation about, yes, Representative Wade?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And given that this already exists in statute, the celebration of Gold Star Mother's Day, and the fact that there are other days where it specifies raising the flag, would it be possible to amend this to specify within that RSA to raise the flag or read out a proclamation from that group?
Thank you for your question. I assume that's to me. If you read the proclamation or the section that I mentioned, 413, it says, it encompasses all of this. It says that the governor shall do, I should just pull it up. Let me just pull it up and read exactly rather than paraphrase. RSA browse, 4 powers of the governor and council in certain circumstances, 13H. So it says the governor shall annually issue a proclamation calling for the proper observance of the first Sunday after Easter, which shall be known as Gold Star Mother's Day, recognizing and honoring all mothers who have lost sons or daughters while on duty in the United States Armed Forces. This is the key sentence. The governor shall urge the citizens of the state to observe this day with appropriate events. The appropriate events, I believe, is in that proclamation, saying all of those things, like we're going to have a flag raising over the state house. Yes, Representative.
Thank you for the comment. I think that sentence is very important based on the testimony that we heard from the families that were here. This is a very special, it's a special flag. And that executive order proclamation and the RSA that the executive can do can allow this flag to be really closely remembered, either in towns where the governor makes that proclamation, and really because the interpretation of that flag, it's so special, people need to get kind of up close and have ceremonies to that. I feel that only in Concord is not enough. Let's make sure that the governor puts out that proclamation and support those families to utilize this already existing RSA.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Wall.
Thank you very much. First off, could someone shut that door, please? It's awfully noisy. I want to be heard. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate all the comments. I was unaware of that section that you found, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that. I've been planning to vote for this, to be supportive of all the families who came in here and all. I will say I come from a military family. I understand where everyone's coming from. I respect it. I have one question, how we would get the governor to do the proclamation, but I want to say I've witnessed over my entire life the meaning of having flags where people can see them and talk about them and gather and have a little ceremony around them. And as much as I love our state house, and I do look at the dome every time we go by, to be perfectly truthful, I don't always look to see what flags are up there, because I guess we know what's up there. I have asked in the past if we couldn't have it up there, if we could have it down in the plaza. There is a flagpole there, but that is reserved for another occasion, another purpose. I've asked also if we could have it at the state library, and that didn't work. So giving it a whole lot of thought and talking with a lot of people in my area, and I come from where Pease Air Force Base was and the Navy Yard and all, a lot of military people. Actually, they would like to see the flag where they could have a little ceremony around it. You know, I'm going to support ITL.
Thank you.
Not because I don't want the flag on the dome, but because I want it where the people can come closest to it. But my question, Mr. Chairman, is how do we get this message to the governor so that we can be sure that this happens?
Thank you for your question. I saw a little word in that section that said shall. So it would seem to me that the governor shall be doing this. It's the word needs to go from anyone, whether it's the representative that brought the bill to us in the first place, or any one of us, to indicate to the governor what activities would be suggested, and then it's up to the governor to make those That's part of the proclamation.
So as I understand it, anybody can approach the governor. Might it make sense then if we individually contact as well as have our executive counselor from our area do that sort of thing to make sure that this happens?
That's how I read the statute, yes. Just so you're aware, I think as I told you, it's 4:13H. Let me tell you some of the others that are all the other letters of the alphabet. So we have Lafayette Day, Constitution's Day, New Hampshire Pearl Harbor Day, Teacher Appreciation Day, Destroyer Escort Day, Congenital Heart Defect Awareness Day, General John Stark Day, Portsmouth Peace Treaty Day. Those are some of them that the governor shall make those proclamations. So in that list and many more, that is
Yeah.
where this is listed. Yes.
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Wong?
Chairman. Thank you for reading that. Can we be sure that our committee report has those listed in it so that people who really deeply want this can understand clearly why the vote is going the way it is?
I will be happy to provide the representative a copy of the report
Thank you.
so you can see it. Representative Barton?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I intend to vote no on ITL. Reading the proposed bill, it only seeks to amend RSA 3 and include it within RSA 3. Doesn't mention RSA 4 at all. And in reading the bill, I believe it doesn't give anything to the government. It's embodied within the statute with those other days that are listed in RSA 3. And I'm okay with that. So I'll be voting no against the motion for ITL, and the representative Wall does not speak for me.
Thank you. Representative Pyre?
Hello, thank you. I also will be voting no against the ITL because from the hearing and everything, it just seems to me that if this group of individuals is asking for recognition, they should get the recognition. And so that's why I'm going to vote against it.
Thank you. Any further conversation? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. We will be voting on House Bill 142 on the motion of ITL.
Vice Chair Sheehan,
Yes.
Representative Turcott,
Yes.
Representative Verville,
Yes.
Representative Boyd,
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Barton,
No.
Representative Wall, Representative Richards,
Yes.
Representative Pyre,
No.
Representative Fox,
Yes.
Representative Wade,
No.
and the chair.
Yes.
We have 9 yea, 3 nay.
Vote being 9-3. The motion passes. HB 142 is ITL'd. Will there be a minority report? Okay, just a second to reset, and then we'll be moving on to actually the non-germane amendment that we have scheduled at 9:30. Okay, the time being 9:30, I'm going to open the public hearing on the non-germane amendment to House Bill 456 and recognize the prime sponsor, Representative Turcott. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Representative Len Turcott. I represent Stratford County District 4, the towns of Barrington and Stratford. I hope everybody has a couple of copies in front of you. The amendment to 456 that replaces it in its entirety was originally 721H. Okay, that's the one we will be basically talking to. You will also see that there's a 908H that we will also discuss. Identical with the exception of lines 11 through 18 on the page 2. And the reason for that is I continually attempted to make sense out of those lines on 721 and convinced myself they were not good. So I had a little bit of a redraft done there. So anyway, we'll kind of speak to both of them as we go here. But let me just tell you about what we've done. The first part on page 1 of the amendment, line 14, we've changed the annual membership allowance from $20 up to $75. Simply done. I'm guessing that hasn't been done in a few decades, so we've upped that. We also changed on line 15 the word fee to dues because that is what these are. These are dues, and to make it consistent throughout the document, we eliminated the word fees. In line 18 through 22, that would prohibit any of those dues membership money from being used to pay a lobbyist or lobbyist organization. It does make specifically clear that any such member or association or member of association can still record a position. They just cannot have a lobbyist use any of that money for a lobbyist. Line 24 through 26 is what I consider probably the most important part of this. And that takes the money that currently goes to the NHMA from a line item that sometimes, at least I know in my town, is buried deep within the budget, and brings it out, and in the case of my town, Barrington, it would require a separate warrant article. Now, the reason for that, of course, in my estimate or my idea is full transparency. And I'll give you a few examples. When I contacted my administrator, who is a fantastic town administrator, by the way, I asked him, I said, what is the amount of money that we pay to the NHMA? And it was somewhere in the $9,500 range. Don't quote me on that exact number. But for example, in this just yesterday, we had a couple warrant articles that came up in my town that were $5,000 and around $10,000. So I think it's worthy of our citizens being allowed to vote on this specific issue. I want to also make it clear that this is not an affront to the NHMA. During my time on as chairman last term of municipal and county, I will say I had a fairly good, actually a very good relationship with the NHMA. Lines 30 through 31 talks about the association not being allowed to state a definitive position. I will say that even though that's in this, I think it's fair to say that somebody can still give testimony And if the listener is paying attention, we'll probably be able to get a good idea of where they actually stand on it. We had in a meeting not too long ago, the Commissioner of Agriculture, I believe, come in without his any kind of a card and testified as an individual. So you don't have to necessarily make a definitive position to get your point across. Then the last part was what I was talking about at the beginning, and that was lines starting at line 11 on page 2. And again, I had to redo it for clarity reasons. I just didn't think it read very well. And basically, the purpose of that is that you cannot commingle funds and you have to segregate them and actually have physically separate accounts for lobbying or the other purposes. So with that, hopefully I've explained what the complete amendment does, and certainly happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative, and you will provide us a pink card at some point.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Further questions? Representative Wade.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in here it states, I'll just do page 1. I think it's in a couple of places, but page 1, line 18, no part of the annual membership dues shall be used to pay a lobbyist or an organization that pays part or all of the salary of a lobbyist. And then it also states that, pardon me one moment. It states the position of the financial separation, where funds would have to be separated if they were used to be paid for lobbying purposes.
Mhm.
However, if we're specifically referring to the New Hampshire Municipal Association in this instance, wouldn't that, it states that they cannot be used to pay an organization that pays even part of the funding for a lobbyist. So wouldn't that encompass, even if the funds were separated, it's still the New Hampshire Municipal Organization in that case? So my question is, does that prohibit the New Hampshire Municipal Association from paying a lobbyist even if the funds were separated?
As long as the money for paying the lobbyist is not taxpayers' money or is specifically raised for that purpose. Does that make sense?
Follow up.
Well, in line 18, it says that no part of the annual membership dues shall be used to pay a lobbyist. Okay. Or pay an organization that pays part of or all of the salary of a lobbyist. So is that what you're saying in regards to financial separation?
But if you look at 31.8 is town officers associations. That's not the section of the RSAs that address NHMA. That is down in line 24. It's odd, but the NHMA has their own RSA within our.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Burville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. I just want to make sure I understand this clearly. So the intent of the amendment is so that taxpayer-derived revenue is not used for lobbying, but it does not preclude the New Hampshire Municipal Association from raising revenue from other sources that they could then choose to dedicate to lobbying. It just can't be taxpayer money. Is that correct?
I wish I could have stated it exactly like you just did, but yes, that's exactly it.
Thank you. Follow up, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and thank you for taking the second question. So, would you believe that since getting involved in local politics some 15 years ago, I get repeated complaints from constituents that part of their local property tax dollars that goes to the New Hampshire Municipal Association is used to lobby against their personal position. So their own money is being used to lobby against their position.
I would absolutely believe that. I've heard that. I'm not as active as some people are in their local town boards or whatever, but I've certainly heard that, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Representative.
Further questions? Representative Wall.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming and giving this to us today, Representative Turcott. What I'm trying to understand, having been a selectman in my community, how do we pay the municipal association our dues and figure out how much of it goes to a lobbyist? How does the municipal association separate every community? Because it's my understanding from testimony that if not all, almost all communities and locations in New Hampshire belong to the New Hampshire Municipal Association. How do they separate each community? Because I know you testified just now as to how much your community pays in. Mine pays just a couple $100, our dues based on our population in our communities. How do you do that? Or how do they do it?
Just so you know, my hearing after 40 years in the cockpit isn't great. So I think I heard what you were asking. How do they separate it? Is that basically,
I think it would be, if I can paraphrase, how would the community know whether their money is being used for lobbying purposes?
Is that if that's a question, that's, when we talked about lines 24 through 26, that's exactly the issue I'm trying to, one of the issues I'm trying to change, and that would require, in your town, as with mine, your Madbury, I believe, would require a separate warrant article on the ballot. So instead of whatever your town currently pays as a light item that's somewhere in the budget that nobody ever sees, now it would be required to bring that out as a warrant article.
Does that help, or did I not answer, paraphrase?
You're partway there, only partway there. How does the municipal association with 200 some odd entities paying dues, how do they know how much time any lobbyist is giving to any particular community? Because certain issues affect some communities more than others. And they try to take a broad spectrum as to what is going to be most beneficial or detrimental to a community. How do they actually do the figuring, or how can they?
All right, let me take a look at this again. I want to make sure I answer correctly. All right, so on line 2 through 5 on page 2, I hope it explains it there. It says no membership dues shall be contributed to or paid to an organization that pays part of all its salary of a lobbyist, but nothing in the section shall be construed to prohibit an individual public official. That's the same language that's up on the Town Officers Association page. And basically, the only in that paragraph, the only change we're making is for the NHMA, because they do have their own RSA, is by putting the requirement to put basically their pay onto the ballot. How they segregate those funds is talked about down in 15 through 17 on there. The sources may be used for that purpose if the other funds are not commingled. It's going to be up to the NHMA to figure out and have their separate accounts to make sure that the funds are not commingled. Does that make sense? No.
No.
Follow up.
Thank you. Follow up. I'm going to just let that rest for a minute or
Okay.
2 or 3. As it is now, any official or any town person, official or resident, can already come up here and testify
Correct.
on any bill anyway. So even though my town, for example, may want to do something that through the municipal association, for example, when we get legal advice on water issues, someone in our town may not agree with that. They can come up anyway
Correct.
already and testify.
Correct.
But you've got it in here that that's part of your amendment.
Yes. That I can answer very, very specifically. And the reason is we've heard testimony on these bills before. And a matter of fact, a couple of the emails that we got sent to us on this, where the individuals have stated that's going to disallow our members from coming up and testifying. That's not true. And that's why we specifically put that in there, to make that perfectly clear, so there's no question on that one. We're making it perfectly clear. It doesn't prevent, I don't know what position you hold in your town, maybe nothing. If you're a selectman, it does not prohibit you from coming up here as a selectman of your town and stating a position we support. One of the other issues, I think, as a small town versus somebody from, say, Manchester, totally two different animals, not unlike what we just went through with our Stratford County commissioner, where we finally brought our commissioners into districts for the first time, because we had, for the past forever, a couple of the cities really determining our three commissioners and excluding the input of the very small and northern parts of our county. So I think it's kind of along that same issue here. This does not prevent you from coming up and testifying. And a matter of fact, as I was driving up here this morning, I even thought about maybe, and I'm sure that NHMA is not going to like this, but maybe where there are disagreements within, when you guys all vote in your NHMA meetings, maybe you guys, maybe everybody, or maybe the state needs to do something similar to what we did in Stratford County, where we go, wait a minute here. Maybe there needs to be a segment of NHMA that focuses on these towns, the cities, this, so you can get your different positions brought before hearings, you know?
Final thing.
Final one.
Final one, and thank you. Going right back to the division of salaries and such. We've heard testimony from the New Hampshire Municipal Association that how on earth do you divide among all the communities and locations, because Hart's location, places like that in the northern part of the state. How do you know how much time a lobbyist puts on a particular issue that may affect more towns than others? How do you put a price tag on that?
I would say that would be an excellent question for probably somebody else who's going to come testify against this. I have no idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Verville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. As somebody who's reasonably well aware of the goods and services that the New Hampshire Municipal Association provides to communities, it sounds to me like the purpose of the amendment is so that local dues derived from taxpayer money goes to support the New Hampshire Municipal Association activities that are not lobbying. And by way of example, if you're not familiar with the New Hampshire Municipal Association, they provide legal services. So I've been on the budget committee on and off for over a decade. And if we have a legal question, we can submit the question to New Hampshire Municipal Association, and their attorneys on staff, weigh it over, and they give you some opinions to help guide you. They provide training for elected officials. So if you newly get elected to a budget committee or a select board or a trustee of the trust funds, et cetera, they offer classes and books that go through the RSAs that are pertinent to those offices and what your authority is and what your authority is not and how to operate and what you're supposed to do. And I think the purpose, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is my question, I think the purpose of the amendment is to allow those monies collected from taxpayers to fund all of those activities, but to not fund direct lobbying, so that if the New Hampshire Municipal Association wants to lobby the legislature, they have to get those funds, those revenues somewhere else. So the accounting is simple. All the dues go to non-lobbying activities, and other sources of revenue could go to lobbying. Is that correct, Representative?
That, again, perfectly stated. I would add that, yes, the other services they provide, again, when I was municipal and county last year, a lot of that stuff was provided and worked very well with them. Correct. I will add the only caveat on that would be that now that money collected from towns for those purposes you stated, other than lobbying, would be required on a warrant article.
Yeah, that part I understand. I agree. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, follow up. Yeah, on that part, I'm crystal clear and agree. I think it's a great idea. Thank you, Representative.
Sure.
Any further questions? Representative Pyer.
Thank you. When we're talking about keep using the phrase lobbying, in my perspective, when we talk about lobbying, we have lobbyists obviously all over the place around here. They're always coming in. They're giving opinions, okay? And then we as the elected officials take what they have to say and then make our decision. This feels like a major overreach and micromanaging of our towns, and why I don't understand the why of why we're doing that. If you in your own personal town don't have an issue with it, which I think that's the minority, then do a warrant article in your town. Why are you trying to control the entire state? It just seems very
excellent.
strange.
Excellent question. This addresses taxpayer-funded lobbying. Yes, there are lobbyists up here all the time. I mean, hundreds of them. I don't know how many lobbyists we have, 100, maybe more. Most of those are funded privately through law firms, business industry association. Those aren't taxpayer money. This addresses taxpayers' money, plain and simple.
So I'm a taxpayer, and I don't feel that this represents my opinions and positions. That's what I'm trying to say is that, we need to hear all perspectives. This feels greatly like a suppression of trying to suppress different opinions and just make it harder for cities and towns. So why not? I feel like we're trying to over micromanage our selectmen and our mayors and all these other elected officials that are trying to do their job with this legislation.
I'm not sure I heard a question in there, but I would say that
Well, how is it not suppressing information? That's my question.
I would say you and everybody else will have the ability to vote your perspective on this. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, we're going to vote here in the committee. It's going to go to the House floor. If it passes, it's going to go to the Senate. It's going to go to the governor's desk. And if everything passes, then your town, you will still be able to vote whether or not to give money to the NHMA or whatever.
So can you? Oh, I'm sorry. Follow up? Yes, it is. Thank you. Can you specify exactly which lines relate to a town doing a warrant article in here?
Yeah. Line 25, it talks about the legislative body. In most towns, that would be through the warrant article. I'm not an expert on cities. I believe that would be through the council, but I know in towns it's through the warrant article process. I don't know where you're from, Representative, but like I say, yesterday on our ballot we probably had 20, 25 warrant articles ranging from a low of $5,000 up to $100,000. Individuals warrant articles that our town's citizens voted on. And I will say, unfortunately, every one of them passed, but, I mean, that's, I guess my answer.
Thank you. Does this amendment affect other associations, or is this specific to NHMA?
It, it affects the Town Officers Association, lines 7 through 22.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Wall, another shot at it.
Another shot at it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for being here. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll keep it closer. Thank you. Based on questions we've just had, most of us have just come through town meeting, and we voted last night on our budget for the year ahead. State runs on a different fiscal year from the way we do. We don't know what issues are going to come up from year to year that affect our communities that the New Hampshire Municipal Association will be working on. How on earth does a community budget an appropriate sum of money for a lobbyist, not knowing what kind of hours may have to go into it for the year ahead when we have no idea what bills are coming up, how much time we'll have to go into it, what communities are affected? I can't see how we can develop a formula for that.
Are you saying that Madberry now will have to hire its own lobbyist? I'm not, maybe I don't understand the question.
We are, my community and the communities I represent, are members of the New Hampshire Municipal
Right.
Association. If we have to separate from that and hire a lobbyist, we can't possibly project what's going to be happening in that type of instance for what bills are coming up, how many bills, how few. The Municipal Association sometimes has a whole lot of bills before the legislature. How does anybody develop a formula for that?
I'm not sure if formula is needed. Isn't the NMA, isn't your dues already based on the population of your town?
Okay, if the dues for the municipal association are based on the population, you are correct in that. But that's the dues, but you want to separate the lobbyists out from that, is that correct?
We want to separate the funds used for lobbying
Yeah.
out from that, correct, and then put it through a warrant article. That's correct.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. And that's where I'm going with it. You separate the lobbyists out from what we're paying from our legal advice and this, that, and the other from the municipal association. But if, again, we have no idea what bills will be coming up. We have no idea what the lobbyists may need to put in for hours or what it's going to cost. I can't see how this is workable. Thank you.
I believe we heard last week, or last time we had a meeting in this a hearing on a similar bill, that the NHMA's budget is $2.3 million. Something tells me that they would have the ability to do what you're looking for.
This will be the last point. Representative Verville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. Is there anything in the proposed amendment that prohibits the New Hampshire Municipal Association from tracking legislation being proposed in the legislature and notifying communities of bills that they believe may be of interest to particular communities so that they are aware of what the legislature is proposing? Is there anything in this bill that prohibits them from tracking that and notifying communities of legislation, pending legislation?
Absolutely not.
Thank you, Representative.
Okay, thank you very much for testifying. We're
Thank
gonna
you.
move on to some new ideas and questions, I'm sure. The chair will call Representative Alvin C. Has asked for 2 minutes, representing Merrimack County, and opposes the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Representative Alvin C. I represent Loudon and 7 other towns in a flotorial district. I'm opposed to this. When I went to vote yesterday, after I voted, I was called aside by the fire chief, and he was really up in arms about this bill because And he says this amendment makes it worse, and after reading it, I think it does. The problem comes from the fact that the towns and cities pay to join either NHMA or other groups so that they can have somebody to review the nearly 1,000 bills we do every year and see which ones have an effect on their group. And there are several different groups. He is involved with fire issues. He knows he can come in here on his own and testify, but while he's here, then he's not available to respond on emergency calls, should there be any. And his concern is that he wants somebody to be able to speak for him and say whether or not they favor a bill. Particularly on the original bill where it says, providing information shall not include promoting or opposing or directly or indirectly any legislation. And just the nature of legislation, it makes it very difficult to provide a statement that does not provide some indication of how you stand on a bill, whether you're in favor or not, and in particular if there are major issues. So that said, it's just a matter of while the town is paying money for joining these organizations, there is a purpose for them joining the organizations, and they want that help. And that includes sending a lobbyist to come visit us or any of the committees to speak on behalf of the members of that group. Thank you, and I'll take questions if there are any.
Thank you. Representative Verville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming and taking my question. Would you believe that it would be possible that there would be an issue, topic X, in which the members of a community were divided on agree or disagree, say on a 60-40 split? So 60% of the residents of a community think it's a good idea and 40% think it's a bad idea. And so if the taxpayer money is used to lobby for the 60%, then the taxes collected from 40% of the population are now being used against their interest. Would you agree that that's possible?
That's possible, yes.
Thank you.
And it's one of those things where just about every issue that comes to a town, there's some people who are opposed to it and some people are in favor of it. How the mix is, whether it's 60-40 or some other.
Follow up.
So I don't disagree with that. The difference is at the local level, they're not hiring a lobbyist to get something done, right? It's the communities aren't always 100% unified, but do you think it's appropriate that you use taxpayer money against the interest of the taxpayer that provided the cash?
Not completely on that. And what I'll say on that is, while that is an issue, I don't think this bill or this amendment corrects that in a suitable way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions? Your microphone. I have one. In your community, Representative, does your community vote on individually or separately on your fire district or your town purchasing services from the Fire Chiefs Association or?
No, it's all lumped into one budget.
Thank you.
I can understand the part in here of separating that out so that the voters of the town can see what part of their budget is going to these organizations for lobbying.
Thank you. So if I can paraphrase then, you are saying you're okay with an individual vote by the town whether to have the services or not?
That might be a useful thing, and I think that might be a good idea for a new legislation for next year to bring the idea up.
Thank you. If you if you had that vote, or what would be the significant difference between deciding whether to contribute with taxpayer money to that organization or not? What changes from this bill to what you're proposing in a future bill?
The main part in here and what the people, at least in my town, say is that it's preventing them from speaking or preventing them from saying actually what they think will help or hinder them in terms of what the legislation is.
Thank you, but you are aware on whatever line it was that said anyone can speak at any time in existing law, and it's reinforced here that nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit any individual member from an association from recording a position before the general court or committee.
Yes, I saw that, and for my fire chief, he doesn't live that far away out in Loudon. It's not right next to Concord, so he could get here, but even still, the several hours that he would have to be away from town, he's not available for his job in town, but there are people much further away than Loudon.
I see. Thank you. I'm going to pass this over to you. Thank you for your testimony. No further questions. Thank you. Yep.
I call Margaret Burns. Good morning. Welcome to Ledge Admin.
Good morning. Thank you so much. My name is Margaret Burns. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we are here this morning in opposition to the non-germane amendment to House Bill 456. The conversation this morning has been a little confusing. I'm going to speak to my understanding of the bill, try to address some of the items that have been raised here this morning, and am absolutely happy to take questions as well at the end. This morning, a lot of the conversation has been around the New Hampshire Municipal Association, as is typically the case with bills like this that are filed year after year. But it's important to understand that this bill affects a lot more than just the New Hampshire Municipal Association. There are many organizations in the state of New Hampshire that represent different groups of local officials that collect dues to perform the functions that they have. And these organizations typically provide an array of services, right? So they typically provide both the education side and they do some level of advocacy at the state legislature. Some of these associations advocate on their own behalf, so perhaps their president is the advocate of the association, but many others hire outside lobbyists. NHMA, an organization structured more similar to us, we have in-house lobbyists who are employees of the association, who are typically individuals who have expertise in municipal issues, so that we are both able to advocate and to provide the other services that the members need. So for example, I'm a lawyer. I've been with the New Hampshire Municipal Association for over a decade. I have the ability to serve as an advocate. I have the ability to provide legal advice and guidance to members, as well as to run the association. The way that I read this bill is it really does two things. It prohibits three specific statewide organizations representing local officials from taking positions on legislation. It separately puts new restrictions on all the other associations that are not listed in 31.8 and 31.8A, puts new restrictions on them that prohibit them from lobbying with public funds, which for those associations may be all of the funds that they receive or collect. So I won't speak for other associations, but to the extent that the majority of their funding comes from public funds that are paid by the municipalities or the local officials who are members of that association, that prohibition or that new restriction created in the amendments at the end on page 2 could entirely prohibit them from any kind of advocacy activity on their behalf or on that association's behalf. So I'll let them speak to that, but it's a pretty broad and draconian prohibition on those associations. So with respect to NHMA, the new language proposed to 31.8a would prohibit us from taking a position on legislation. But I also heard when the bill was introduced that because we could still provide information to the legislature, legislators could sort of read between the lines to know what position we are expressing when we're speaking to that legislation. I struggle to understand then why the prohibition on taking a position is necessary. If we can come here and provide the information, as we already do, on behalf of our members, then why the ban on speech? Why the ban on 2 words, oppose and support, if it's clear from the information we're providing that that's the position that we're taking? The bill would also then override our member adopted policies. So I've spoken to this committee before about how every 2 years, NHMA has a member-driven legislative policy process. Our members serve on policy committees. They review our legislative policies. They ultimately meet in a town meeting style group. They vote by a supermajority whether to adopt the policies proposed or whether to make amendments, whether to strike, etc. And so by prohibiting us from taking a position, this would be the state legislature overriding a local organization's process for taking positions on legislation. Another aspect of what this amendment does is instead of allowing NHMA, which again is a private independent organization, instead of allowing us to represent our members at the legislature, we become more of an instrumentality of the state. We're restricted to providing information, but we can't do what we've been sent here by our members to do, which is to take positions on legislation and to explain why we have those positions, why we have the great interest in the legislation, why it's positive, why it's not, what the concerns are. So that is a deep concern about what the amendment to 31.8a does. As to the segregation of funds, I've already spoken to how that could be a complete ban on advocacy for many of these organizations who are 100% or perhaps primarily funded by public funds through their dues. If there is a transparency argument here, a transparency argument with respect to the use of public funds, I would say 2 things. One, the provision in, and I'm looking at, I suppose they're the same lines. I'm looking at the new amendment I saw this morning, so the 0908. Looking at the language in line 25 and 26 at the bottom of the page, that language doesn't change anything. Municipalities already have an obligation, or legislative bodies are already required to appropriate the money to pay these dues. Whether they're in the budget or in a separate warrant article, the vote to approve is an appropriation by the legislative body. Some towns already have separate warrant articles for NHMA's dues. It's always been their right to do that. Individual voters, 25 or more, can petition to put it on the warrant and make it a separate warrant article. That's been done as well. There is absolutely nothing prohibiting municipalities from doing it that way. The other thing that I would mention, 2 other things that I would mention. Just last year, this committee recommended a bill that would require the Secretary of State's office to have digital and online filing process for lobbyist reporting, and that bill was signed into law by the governor. So if there's concerns about increased transparency for the amount of funds that are being used to lobby, that bill is actually going to help with increased transparency, because NHMA already reports the amount of money that we spend on lobbying. They're already publicly available reports that anyone can look up and pull. But when that digital reporting goes through, I think transparency will be even more improved. And I'm not just talking about NHMA, I think it will be improved for lobbying in general. The final point I want to make is I think we have a bit of a red herring with the argument that only in the situation of organizations like NHMA are public funds being used to lobby. The reality is there are many private sector organizations and entities that are part of municipal and state budgets. They receive taxpayer funds, energy companies, lawyers' firms, other private entities that receive taxpayers' funds all the time, and they would not be restricted in any way by this legislation. They would not be touched in any way by this legislation. So they would have no further restrictions on their lobbying, but NHMA and similar groups would have restrictions on their lobbying. For these reasons, NHMA is opposed to the legislation. I even thought to myself when I read the bill that one of the curious results of this legislation would be that if NHMA was no longer lobbying under RSA Chapter 15 and we were only providing information, there would actually be less public reporting because we would no longer be filing our public lobbying reports with the Secretary of State. We would no longer fall under that statute, which seems to be an odd consequence of legislation that so often has been surrounded by conversations about transparency and use of public funds. So for these reasons, NHMA is opposed to the bill. We're opposed to how it affects our organization. We're opposed to how it affects the members. We're opposed to how it affects similarly situated organizations who advocate on their members' behalfs. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Up here?
Thank you for coming in and giving that concise summary. Question. I think I heard you say this, that even if a town did a warrant article to pay their dues, that wouldn't matter. The bill still wouldn't allow the activities. Is that correct?
So even if this passed under the new amendments to 31(8)(a), once our dues were appropriated by that municipality, we still would only be allowed to provide information to the legislature, not to lobby.
So when you say, oh, I'm sorry, can I do a follow-up? Okay. When you say provide information, what would that look like? You would come in and give information, but you couldn't say oppose or against? Is that what you're saying?
It's unclear, and I think that our staff would be concerned about being accused of taking positions. So, for example, I'm here today saying that I oppose the amendment to House Bill 456. Under this bill, I couldn't say that. But if I listed out all the reasons that the bill is negative and hurts municipalities, will I be accused of lobbying, of taking a position, of influencing a vote? Because of course, when I express serious concerns about a piece of legislation, I am indeed influencing a vote, and I'm doing it transparently. There's nothing hidden about it. But could that be construed to be illegal lobbying under the bill? I don't know. And when we pass legislation that is unclear to the extent at which speech is prohibited or allowed, we chill speech. And I would suggest that that is very disturbing, especially in the context of a legislative process.
Follow up. Thank you. So the other thing I heard you say, it sounds like if this legislation were to pass, nonprofits such as yourself and other groups, Firefighters Association, Police Association, whatnot, which I believe are nonprofits, would be suppressed, but for-profit entities, law firms, those sorts of things would not be affected by this.
That's
Is that
correct.
what I heard you say? Okay.
Rep. Wade.
Thank you for taking my question. So you had mentioned that a lot of towns and these smaller organizations get all or vast majority of their funds from state and local and dues like that. So are there any funds that NHMA or these organizations get that are not state or local?
I won't speak for other organizations. I will let them speak for themselves. NHMA does have some other funds that come through sponsorships that would not constitute local funds. We do also have some other services that have an extra fee on them, but those are paid by local funds. So it's a little unclear under this amendment whether those would also be funds that could not be used for lobbying activity.
Follow up.
Could you give an approximate percentage of how much of the budget comes from the dues and how much might come from those kinds of sponsorships?
I believe, and I don't like to speak off the top of my head, so I'm giving you estimates based on what I recall. I believe about 70% of our budget is dues, but then another portion of the remaining 30 would include some of the trainings and other events that we charge an extra fee for, which would be local funds. So it's only a small portion at the end of the day that you could call so-called private sector funds.
Last follow-up.
Last follow up.
So would it be fair to say that in the event that you were not able to use any of those dues on payments for lobbying, that you would just be unable to afford lobbyists?
Yes, and I think the biggest problem with this idea of we'll just segregate out certain funds for lobbying purposes, segregate out those so-called private sector funds from the public sector funds. The biggest problem with that, and I've said this before in this committee, is that we do not know how much will be spent on lobbying until the end of a quarter, right? So I'm sure this committee is aware that the way it works is that you register annually with the Secretary of State's office as a lobbyist, and then at the end of each quarter, you file a report that details your revenues and expenses related to lobbying. So this idea that we could segregate ahead of time the correct amount of money when we don't know how much time is going to be spent throughout the session at the legislature, it's really not practical. And I think it sets us up for violating the law inadvertently, trying to do it correctly, but not knowing what amount of funds will be spent on actual lobbying. And that's deeply problematic. And that could also serve to affect whether the association or other associations can lobby, because they'll have concerns about violating the law.
Rep. Verbal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming in and taking my question. I'm going to assume that you heard some of my hypotheticals earlier of a 60-40 split. I can imagine another hypothetical where a community is in favor of a particular piece of legislation for whatever reason, and I can imagine that another community would be opposed to it, right? So you've got a community A that's for, community B that's against. But the association can only take one position. And so if a supermajority takes a position, then you're using taxpayer money to lobby against their position. And in fact, it could be an entire community. So doesn't that become compelled speech with taxpayer funds, right? Once I pay my dues and you take a position opposite of my community's will, isn't that compelled speech against my will?
No, I thank you for that question. Our members understand that when NHMA lobbies at the legislature, we represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. And they understand that they, as members, direct the course of what the municipal association lobbies on through their voting at our legislative policy conference. So, and because they are local officials, they also have a deep appreciation for the fact that in a democratic process, the majority rules as far as what positions are taken or what outcomes occur as part of the voting process. So no, I do not see that issue in the way that you've described. We do at times have individual members have their own individual positions on specific legislation That's never been an issue for the association. It's never been an issue for our relationship with the members. And we encourage them, if they have a different position or if they have any position, including on legislation that doesn't fall within NHMA's purview to advocate on, we encourage them to come out and express their position regardless of whether it coincides with NHMA's position, because we believe that's their right to do that, and that more advocacy and more input is better than less. So no, I don't agree with that categorization. And our members absolutely know that membership with the municipal association is voluntary. And if that they had a true and fundamental disagreement with the association and the direction that we take, that they would have the ability to simply leave the municipal association.
Follow up, if I may. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for taking my second question, because and it's not the question I intended to ask, but you brought something to light, to light for me. The challenge is the dues is an all-in number. So would you believe that I have a majority of constituents that love the New Hampshire Municipal Association for the legal advice, for the training, etc. But yet I have a significant amount of constituents that don't like the lobbying, but it's all or none, right? They can't choose to divorce themselves from the lobbying. So if they want the carrot, they have to take the stick. And so that I guess that's the disconnect with how I perceive it. I apologize. It's not really a question. I guess I don't have a good form of a question, but that's sort of where I'm coming. And if you want to address that, holistically, that'd be fine. Thank you.
I think I'll say two things to that. One is that I believe there is a fundamental misunderstanding at times between what NHMA lobbies on and what people perceive us to lobby on. I know that I've said this in this committee before, but I will say it again. The majority of our advocacy does one of two things. It argues against pushing more costs down onto taxpayers, and it argues against taking away the power of voters at the local level, right? So zoning mandates is one of the big things we lobby against. And really at its core, that's a voter rights issue. That's a argument to not take away the ability of voters to have their voice. So that's one thing I would say in response to that. My other response is that as recently as last year, this legislature was a member of the National Council of State Legislatures. That organization lobbies at the federal level for state legislatures who are its members. And I am certain that every single constituent in the state of New Hampshire doesn't personally agree with every position that that organization takes. But the legislature, as the elected officials who represent them, believe that it's in their interest to be a part of this organization and that it does more good than bad for you in your position as elected officials. And that's a similar corollary to NHMA's representation of cities and towns in New Hampshire at this state legislature.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Rick Barton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very simple question for you. Are you aware of any existing statutes that would otherwise restrict speech, even if it was limited to taking a position on a bill by a lobbyist or an individual?
Any other statutes that restrict, just restrict in general speech by other lobbyists?
That would restrict any speech that you would give testimony. We'll say specifically
No.
for a position.
I'm not.
Me neither.
Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
Just to catch everyone up, we have 3 pink cards. I would ask, we will hear from all 3. They've asked for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and 3 minutes. I am going to ask that we try to keep questions to a minimum and/or try to make sure that our speakers speak to ground that hasn't been trod on already. even if it's just standing and saying, I concur. But I had dedicated about an hour for this. We've gone the hour. And I'd like, unless we want to jump into the afternoon here, I'd like to move along. But with that, I will call Kathy Stacy from New Hampshire Association of Counties. Welcome to Legislative Administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kathy Stacy. I am the president of the New Hampshire Association of Counties and the Rockingham County Register of Deeds. Obviously, I do concur with the testimony that NHMA just provided. And I'll just say that I do represent one of the associations that would be affected by this amendment. We do lobby. I represent 10 counties. And our issue obviously is, if we do not have a lobbyist representing our organization, we would have 10 separate counties with individuals from those counties having to come here to testify on legislation, which really is not economically feasible. It really isn't a good way to spend taxpayer dollars. Obviously there's over 1,000 bills. We do have a legislative committee that meets every Friday. We go over all the bills and we determine, positions that we're going to take. There's 89 members. And obviously we take very seriously what's happening here in Concord. And I think that we are best served, obviously, by having a lobbyist. And we do have dues, and it's part of the county budget. And I'm sure all of you are aware because you're all members of your county budget, your county delegation, right? So you're voting the budget. And you rely upon the subcommittees that are developed by your executive committee and the delegation chair, and those are the committees that review what's happening with the budget. And I would say that, we do have education and advocacy. We do sponsorships. 50% of our sponsorships pay for lobbying, 50% of that. And, we have affiliates, which, obviously every county department, whether it's the nursing home, which is one of the biggest departments and the most costly for the county, and there's a lot of legislation affecting that. And we come up here because we want to protect the taxpayers of our counties from pushback from, whether it's reduction in fees, increased fees. And we think that we do a pretty good job at that. But this bill would not permit us to do that. We would not be able to have a lobbyist, which would mean you would be seeing, could be 10 correction superintendents, it could be 10 nursing home, supervisors. It would, and as you say yourself, we don't want to hear redundancy in testimony, but obviously everybody would be coming down because they would have to testify to make sure they're protecting their taxpayers in their particular county. So we do oppose this bill, and we ask you to take that into consideration.
Thank you. Thanks for keeping to your time limit. Are there any questions? I have a quick one. You have the Friday morning meeting, I think you said, or the
Correct.
Yeah. If there is a county or two that chooses not to agree with the consensus, I guess, of what to lobby or what position to take, what happens then?
In the past, when we've had counties that have had their own individual issues, we have not participated. We have determined that we are not going to come here and lobby. They can come and they can testify themselves. That's how our organization handles it.
So it is a unanimous decision or no decision?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seeing none. Chair will call Dennis Shanahan, representing Dover and NHMA.
Thank you, members of the committee, for
example of trotting over previous testimony if you're representing NHMA.
Exactly, and I will avoid that. I did provide some written testimony that had similar thoughts as what you've heard so far. What I would like to do in my very brief time is to provide a perspective as an elected official on what the NHMA does and how it does it. There's been quite a bit of discussion about under this amendment, who can sit in front of you and express an opinion with a statement that, well, any elected official or appointed official can come up specifically and provide their opinion on it. And I'd just like to kind of run through what the Dover City Council looks like. We've got 9 members. We've got a project developer and a consultant with 3 school-age kids, a production manager with school-age children, full-time package handler, you should see her during the Christmas season, school-age children, a professor, lecturer, a small business owner with children, a retired department head from the shipyard, an independent contractor specializing in finished carpentry, an IT consultant, a local business owner who trains international gymnastics overseas, and a retired teacher. So you think of that group, there's only a couple of us who can do this, and I do this fairly frequently. The others, though, they don't really have the opportunity to be able to come up and deal with the 1,000 to 2,000 bills to even be able to digest them and work their way through it. So I think it really is a detriment to consider you can simply replace the lobbyists that come from the NHMA with the individual elected officials coming up here, never mind appointed officials. I kind of want my city manager to spend his time down at his desk fixing things, getting the road clear, dealing with turmoil that's coming down from DC. So that's kind of the how it's very difficult for a group of elected officials. So what is it we do to make sure that we're representing the will of the people when we're sitting here in front of you? There's been a discussion about how we get to our policies, and I want to focus on that a little bit. So the Dover City Council reviews and aligns itself with the policies and principles that guide the work of the NHMA. We put in a resolution in front of the City Council saying, here's the policies and principles. Let's endorse them. And in some cases, sometimes some of those are removed from endorsement, and therefore, as their representative, I'm very careful to go up and make sure that I don't provide any endorsements to the ones that the council has already turned down. Very few of those the council adopts the vast majority of the policies and principles. The development of those policies and principles obviously includes the members and representatives of the NHMA. There are 3 different committees of at least a dozen people. When their work is done over the course of the summer, every other year, a policy conference is convened, and every member, all 234 members or more, are invited to come in and be a delegate and to vote on and pass these policies and principles. This is coming from the bottom up. I feel when I sit in front of a group that I am speaking for my constituents. I do recognize that many of our decisions that we make don't have unanimous support, that there is a 60-40, a 70-30. We're going to work on a budget and vote on it in the next couple of weeks, and I can tell you that the citizenry are split. There's a 51% and a 49% pro and con. That's how we do representative democracy, to allow the representatives to come up in front of a group like yourself and bring the voice of the people with it. So this allows the opinions and perspectives of our citizens to flow through our elected officials, and it gives a clear mandate to NHMA and what to speak for as the voice. So in the end, when we appear in front of it, we are bringing the will and the input of our constituents with it, and an interference to that would be removing the ability of NHMA to speak for the people. So bottom line, I'll paraphrase this as the NHMA is a lobbying organization. They represent a special interest group. That special interest group are the citizens of New Hampshire. It's us. All of us are represented by the NHMA. We may not always agree with every policy and principle, but the process gets us to a point where those are overwhelmingly accepted by the folks that have an impact on it. So with that, I'll conclude my comments, address any questions, and again, thank you for listening to my testimony this morning.
Thank you. Representative Wade has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming today. As a fellow elected rep from Dover, appreciate your time, and I got to complain to you about that new corkscrew sidewalk off of Portland Ave later.
I was the first to bring that to the city manager's attention.
Well, I appreciate it.
The engineer has a plan to help work on that.
Gotcha.
We can move along.
Good to know. Do you mind just describing the challenges that took for you to come here today as an individual as opposed to a lobbyist?
Well, I'm one of the fortunate ones, the retired guy. My schedule can be pretty open. It has filled up quite a bit in the last couple of years. And in fact, just to make sure for due diligence and transparency, I was fortunate enough to be elected as the chair of the NHMA Board of Directors, in addition to being the chair of the Coast Board of Directors. So for me, it's not that much of a challenge, hence I take every opportunity I can. I think of Council Lindsay Williams, the professor, lecturer, 2 kids, small business owner. Definitely a struggle for her to consistently be able to come up here and speak to us. And I feel that the process that the NHMA has in place very well represents her interests as is represented the will of the people.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Last pink card I have is for Dave Curran. I hope that's right, or Curran. Asking for 3 minutes and opposes the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. My name is Dave Karen, the Town Administrator for the Town of Derry, and also on the Board of Directors of the New Hampshire Municipal Association. I submitted testimony to you last evening. I will not repeat that, but just to summarize and try to provide some additional clarity, I've been a Town Administrator in the state for 44 years, and during various stints, I've been on the NHMA Board of Directors for over 20. It's been my experience, we've never had a concern from a governing body of a New Hampshire municipality questioning the propriety of lobbying, because that's one of the main services we request NHMA to perform on our behalf. And it's very important to think back to the process with both Margaret and Dennis said. We are a democratic process. We have a legislative policy conference in which any member, which are all 234 communities in the state, are members of NHMA, they can participate in that process to determine what the legislative positions will be. Our attendance there is about 80. It's 1/3 of our membership. And seeing through various town meetings, I put that participation rate against any town meeting in the state. How do we get to those recommendations, which those 234 communities can't have an opportunity to voice on? Is that we have 3 separate committees, sort of like budget committees, that look at different areas: general administration, finance, and then we have environmental policies. All those are 60 people. 1/4 of our association participates in that process. So you can see it's a very democratic process. So I don't want to make Margaret use a word salad, but when NHMA comes up here, they say NHMA opposes the bill. What they actually are saying is that NHMA, on behalf of the directive of our 234 towns and cities, oppose or support this bill. Now, you have the rest of my testimony, but I must confess some confusion regarding lobbyists. What I understand from the testimony today is that if NHMA comes up here and doesn't state a position on a bill, but either advocates or extols the virtues of a bill or warns of the consequences, but doesn't actually say they're for or oppose, then I presume that's not to be lobbying. Well, extolling the virtues or warning of the consequences without stating a clear position is essentially a distinction without a difference. We pay these people to represent us. I love you guys, but I can't be here every day of the week. That's why we collectively subscribe to NHMA. The Derry Town Council has been a member forever to make sure they carry through our policies voting on so you hear municipal voices. This legislation does not place a gag order on municipalities to testify, but that's the practical implication. Because we have work to do at home. I've got a $55 million municipal corporation with 250 employees to manage, and nor my staff, we can't be here every day about these issues. So respectfully, this is the wrong venue. If you believe that your citizens are not well served by NHMA, they should be speaking with their governing bodies and advocating for the governing bodies to not include it in their budget. This seems to be a lot of, very respectfully, this seems to be a lot of legislative gymnastics to address an issue which is not an issue. Finally, if you go back to the original legislation, which was crafted by the state legislature 64 years ago, it already put guardrails on NHMA's advocacy before the legislature. It's very clear. They can only advocate for municipal issues. Those are the guardrails. So by clear inference to me is that the legislature 65 years ago saw the value of that dialogue and information sharing. So again, I don't think this bill is necessary, and I would respectfully request that you vote HB 456 as inexpedient to legislate. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Any brief questions? I have one brief question. Would it be your opinion that the majority of the 234 cities and towns rely exclusively on NHMA or some organization to provide them the information of what legislation is coming that affects them?
I'd say in most part, most of our communities rely upon NHMA for that information. We receive a legal bulletin every Friday, which is mailed to all local officials, which explains the bills of municipal interest, the impacts of those, and the position that NHMA has been directed to take by its legislative policy conference. You know, there's been a previous question about how do you, if you have some communities that are for, some against, how do you handle that? A perfect example is some of you folks may remember education funding, the donor and receiver communities. I mean, we were split right down the middle as far as some communities would benefit and it would cost other communities under that legislation. Everybody knew, our members knew and understood that NHMA could not take a position on that particular legislation because it would impact our members to various degrees, both in a positive way and a negative way.
Last question for me is that bulletin available to anyone or just to the members?
Anyone.
Where is it?
Website, anyone can register for the email for it. It's not limited to members.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very
Thanks
much
for
for
your time.
coming here.
Appreciate it.
I have no more pink cards. I am closing the hearing on whatever the number is. I've lost track. 157, House Bill 157.
456.
That's Turcott. That's 456. Error number 2. Okay, so now we're done. We're moved out of the public hearing for that bill. We are going to then jump back into the executive session mode. We are now down to 3:14, I believe. Anyone want to disagree with that?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
That's not it.
Oh, 3:14 we've already done. That was retained in a prior session. 3:15, and I will recognize Representative Sheehan, who moves ITL. So I'm looking for a second to the ITL motion for House Bill 315.
Second.
Seconded by Representative Turcott. For this, I have a handout. That way. I gotta keep one, and that goes that way. What you will be getting or have in front of you is a complaint process relative to the truthfulness in testimony. And this came out of the Speaker's office, as you can see on the first line. I'll just read the last, well, I guess it's the last paragraph. The Speaker's office will review the complaint and correspond with the complainant if more complete information is necessary. The Speaker's office will evaluate the unique facts and circumstances around each complaint, determine whether the complaint is actionable, and develop a method to address it. That would seem to take the steam out of House Bill 315. But I just wanted, it seemed to me that not many people were aware of this process, so I wanted to make sure that was in front of anyone. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 315? Crickets. So I will ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion of ITL on House Bill 315. When he is ready.
Vice Chair Sheehan,
Yes.
Representative Turcott,
Yes.
Representative Verville,
Yes.
Representative Boyd,
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Barton,
Yes.
Representative Wall, Representative Richards,
Yes.
Representative Pyre,
Yes.
Representative Fox,
Yes.
Representative Wade, and the chair.
Chair votes yes.
12 yea, 0 nay.
Anyone have an objection to consent? Seeing none, House Bill 315 will be on consent as ITL. Quick second. On House Bill 157, is there a second?
Second.
Jinx.
On the ITL motion of House Bill 157. Representative Turcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to keep it very brief. Just a few points on it, and most of these points I've already gone over with the prime sponsor prior. I think the concept of what they're trying to get at is actually good. I think more detailed fiscal analysis also would be very, very commendable, but it's just unworkable for a lot of reasons, and I'll give you those reasons. First, it's just the amount of time that would be required to produce these extremely detailed notes. Most likely would also require additional manpower, which would also incur, of course, more costs. And because of the time required to do this, it would probably impact the legislative deadlines. The next thing is, what we get now is, and I'm going to agree with the prime sponsor and co-sponsors, that what we get now is sometimes questionable at best. It's very on a microscopic level, a microeconomic level. The problem is when you start expanding out from the micro to the macro level, you start introducing subjectivity into the analysis. And the further you get, and the more macro you get, that analysis can go either way. And I would even say that it could go either way based on political leanings. So the last part of the reason, the last thing that I would say is I believe again, the concept is good, and as I told the prime sponsor, there's a lot of good names on here, and instead of forming yet another study committee, why not get together with the individuals on this list, spend some time and see what you can come up with, something that is better than establishing a study committee. I think it's going to be an exercise in futility, but at least give it a try for those people who are interested in doing it. I see a lot of names from Ways and Means on here, and so I think that would be the way to go. And for all those reasons, I stand by the inexpedient to legislate.
Thank you, Representative Turcott. The bill is open to further amendment, and I have in front of me an amendment from the prime sponsor et al. And it is 2025-0762H. I'm hoping everyone has a copy of that. And I would recognize Representative Payer for summarizing, perhaps.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Representative Munns, who's in the room, brought the amendment forward to make it easier and consolidated the members to make it more concise, and also kind of limited the duties so that it addressed the concerns that were brought up in committee when we first discussed this bill. So this amendment makes it more streamlined and less cumbersome to address some of those concerns.
Thank you. I don't disagree with the amendment. However, it doesn't change my opinion of the ITL motion. And for this reason, I'm not sure you could amend my biggest concern, which is given our time constraints, we have a two-year term, and we have numerous deadlines along the way. This is not the first time this conversation has been had, just so everyone knows, and I'm sure Representative Wall can back me up on that. The fact that we could have a deeper dive, for lack of a better term, but it's awfully hard to do. I think our secretary's, our House Clerk mentioned one that was recently done in Commerce, as I recall. That was an 8-month process. Trying to fit 8 months into our 2-year legislative term, posing all of our deadlines in the same time, makes it damn near impossible. So I'd be perfectly happy listening to suggestions of how that can be done within our time frame. I think in conversations I've had recently with prior directors of OLS and LBA, they would be willing to discuss possibilities of how to do this. Certainly not for 1,000 bills, but perhaps for the 2 or 3 or 4 that we're generally thinking of. But even if we were to retain this and talk about it within committee, it's not going to come out until next January, and by the time it then passes the Senate and is signed by the governor, presumably, we're giving a very small little window for that type of deep dive discussion as a committee, as a study committee. My better suggestion, I think I follow along with Representative Turcott's, that I'm a much bigger fan of ad hoc committees. You know what you want to talk about. You know the people you want to have in that study committee. Do it now. Why wait for that whole big scenario to keep going by, and come back with a bill rather than a study committee? We had a meeting, for those that are freshmen. We had a meeting last year on committees and commissions. In that committee, and I'm pleased to be able to quote Representative Smith, Marjorie Smith, we have smart people here. We don't need commissions. We have, with 425 of us, we have enough brain power here to solve almost anything. And it doesn't have to be done within the framework of a study committee. I think it can be done. I think it could be discussed on an ad hoc basis now, not waste the time, and perhaps even in September come back with a better bill. Thank you. Representative Wade.
Thank you. So this is more of a general question. It sounds like there's a separate issue of the deadlines being really tight that would make this infeasible. So is there, or has there been any kind of review of those deadlines in the House?
You just expanded this bill beyond all. Now we're talking a constitutional bill.
Okay, I didn't know if that was something that was already under review or if that's something that would, be beneficial.
It was in 1784. You know, there's a lot of things that we do that are based on the second Tuesday of the third Wednesday beginning with T. You know, it would be a much bigger deal.
Okay,
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Further discussion. It's really not appropriate for the exec session unless there's a question that somebody had, but thank you. I think I see no further questions. I'm happy to ask the clerk to call the roll on the ITL. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you for the time.
Were
Mr.
you
Chair.
waving long, or did I just not see you?
No, I wasn't waving too long.
Okay.
You just did that a little fast, and so and then I started to wave at you. But that's okay.
I apologize.
I'm all good. No problem. It doesn't count as the mistake. You're still at 2. I have felt inspired in some of the testimony from the previous bill to just state, and I'm going to start to try to do this because this is from the beginning of our bill, to just state for every bill, would you believe, the question I have is that the online support for this bill was 116 and opposition was 7. That's all.
Thank you. I will agree that I am remiss to state those. I do look at each and every one of them, and I have the numbers somewhere here, but I am remiss to put it on the public record. With that, any further comments?
Question of the chair. We are going to vote on an ITL for 157. I'm assuming we're not voting on the amendment since it never received a second also.
We
Somebody
could, if anyone would like to. We did not. We introduced it. We did not.
Can I make a motion?
We can. Oh, I'm getting the head shake.
Oh.
Hold on. That's right. There is no. The ITL would have to be voted down in order to bring up the amendment. You can't have
that
an
motion was made
ITL as
before the
amended.
amendment got the
in
chance
other
to be
words.
introduced.
What's
Right.
that?
That motion was made before the amendment got the chance to be introduced. Though.
Correct. The motion was made ITL, and then we brought up the discussion of this. You would have to vote down the ITL, and then offer a motion of ought to pass, and then introduce the amendment and ask for a second. That would be the procedure.
Question on procedure.
Question?
So how
We have the procedure person here, so.
Yeah. So I guess I was expecting that we would have discussed the amendment first, like we did previously, from a procedural point of view. But that was
Well,
not,
no, procedurally, prior to this, we had an ought to pass motion, and then we moved, it was open to further amendment, and we brought in the amendment. You can have ought to pass as amended, you can't have ITL as amended,
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
right?
Point of
We good?
parliamentary inquiry.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, why do we have a copy of the amendment before us if it was there no intention to introduce it?
It was a discussion point. Um, It was brought up, I think, actually, in the original discussion
Yeah.
of the, yeah, you can
Yeah.
point to it all you want, but I'm telling you that it was brought up during the discussion of the original motion that they had had a conversation and there was an amendment. So we were talking about what was in that amendment.
So
Yep. Representative Bertle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to make sure we're getting this thorough, because it's my understanding that amendments could be brought to a committee, to executive session, that simply don't get picked up or moved, right? It's certainly not unprecedented that an amendment would be on the table but never acted upon. Is that correct?
I think probably more than half of my amendments that I brought to executive session were never introduced. It's a discussion point more than anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good. You had your hand raised, Representative Turcott? No? You've taken it?
Representative Verville said exactly what I was going to say.
He often does that. Yes, Representative Wade.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to emphasize this amendment was put forward and we had intended to vote on it and discuss it. But the motion to ITL it was the very first thing that was said on this bill. There wasn't even any period of time for us to make a motion to introduce the amendment and second it. And I understand that maybe at this point we can't, since the ITL motion has already been made, but I just want to make sure that future amendments get the opportunity to be introduced before we immediately jump to the ITL motion.
Representative Verville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding that if an ITL motion is made, then the way to get the amendment brought up is to overturn the ITL in committee. And so then, because we only operate by affirmative disposition, right? So if the ITL is rejected, then presumably the next motion would be ought to pass, and at that point, an amendment could be brought forward for consideration. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
I concur with Representative Turcott. Once again, you've said what I should have said in the
So
first
I'm
place.
still Representative Verba. I think
I'm
I think
sorry.
we switched it twice.
No,
but
I
I think
agree
we're
with
even now.
Representative
Great.
Turcott agreeing with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
They got me going. Further? Representative Barton.
Yes. So if an amendment was made that would have improved the original bill, and I never had a chance to see it or hear it or even entertain it before the motion was made, because someone quickly jumped to an ITL motion, which I seconded. But I wouldn't have seen this. If I would have seen this, maybe I would have changed my mind and said, no, with this incorporated into the bill, it would be ought to pass. It doesn't make sense to me to have an amendment presented before the committee and not be considered, because now all I can't even consider this. I can only consider the legislation that's been moved before me. And if I vote ITL on that, and this would have changed my opinion if it was introduced, that opportunity is gone. So I don't understand the procedure.
So I disagree with your premise. You do have the opportunity. I allowed, or first off, the amendment was emailed to the entire committee a week ago anyway, something like that. Secondly, you still have the opportunity to consider that. You would just vote no on the ITL motion and then the committee would be able to do it. You have it in front of you. It's not that you can't consider it. You can factor that into your vote on the ITL motion. Representative Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if the members who made the ITL motion would be willing to withdraw that for now, so we could have a discussion on the amendment.
I'm not the one that decides that. Seeing no further discussion, I can ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion of ITL on House Bill 157.
Vice Chair Sheehan,
Yes.
Representative Turcott,
Yes.
Representative Verville,
Yes.
Representative Boyd,
Yes.
Clerk votes yes, Representative Barton,
No.
Representative Wall, Representative Richards,
No.
Representative Pyre,
No.
Representative Fox,
No.
Representative Wade,
No.
and the chair.
Chair votes yes.
We got 6 yea, 6 nay.
Motion passes of ITL on House Bill 157. I don't know the vote.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4,
It's got to
5,
be
6,
7, no, 6.
3, 4, 5, 6. I get 6 yea, 6 nay.
So the motion fails. Now we are looking for another motion.
Mr. Chairman,
No,
point of order.
I don't know.
Yes.
I thought a tie vote out of committee was a no recommendation, and so,
Got to go through the process.
fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Looking for another motion.
I'd like to make a motion.
Representative Pyre.
I'd like to make a motion on amendment,
Well, first you would
sorry.
make the motion of
Oh.
ought to pass presumably.
okay, I would like to make a motion of ought to pass on House Bill 157.
Second.
Fine. And is that seconded?
Seconded.
Seconded by Representative Wade. Is there any discussion?
Yes. Or question regarding order, please.
Mhm.
How do we make the motion on the amendment?
So it is open to, you can further open the amendment. You can offer proposal or amendment 07628, is that what that says? To House Bill 157.
So,
Is that what you're doing?
yes, please.
Okay, and there would be a second?
Seconded.
Okay, and now you would like to discuss Amendment 157, which I thought you already did, but
I did already. Thank you. So I think a lot of the confusion here is like parliamentary procedure. So thank you.
maybe.
We'll make the motion in a second.
Motion seconded.
I,
And Wade.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So as we went through our initial hearing on this bill, excuse me, I need lunch.
Could have.
Blood sugar. Again, fiscal notes are consistently a troubling thing, and we do have a lot of study commissions. We've actually just disassembled some today, and I think there's good representation here on this process because fiscal notes do cause a problem and a burden. And sometimes I always wonder why some of these bills even have a fiscal note. So putting together a study committee, and the amendment minimizes the impact of that and simplifies it with regards to the scope and the membership. So if we had folks there's clearly individuals that want to participate in this study committee. So I think that speaks to a lot. There's a lot of support online. So why not put it through our committee and let the House floor decide on moving forward? That's my thoughts.
I just want to emphasize I support this amendment because I think it incorporates a lot of the feedback that we got during that initial hearing, including things like incorporating the legislative budget assistant as a member, which I think might be more challenging to do as an ad hoc committee. And I fully agree there are lots of committees that might be obsolete at this point or might not meet or have a very narrow scope that might have been better served by an ad hoc committee. But this is definitely a case where it's a persistent issue that comes back year after year. And I think this amendment does a good job at keeping the scope reasonable and approaching this in a way that would be beneficial to everyone involved.
Further discussion. Representative Turcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Other than really the changing of the membership and removing being appointed by chairpersons, This changes none of my perspective on the underlying bill, and I'll reiterate for the record those issues. One, I believe the sponsors and the co-sponsors can do this ad hoc without a formal committee, yet another study committee being formed. We talked about the time requirement, the detailed fiscal notes, the uncertainty and subjectiveness of the expansion. When you start expanding the scope of these fiscal notes. And again, I will say that I think the concept is good. I believe it would be very helpful to have better fiscal analysis. I would suggest the individuals, sponsors and co-sponsors get together and come up with the plan and a bill for next session. Thank you.
Representative Wall.
Thank you very much. Since there seems to be such concern on both sides on this, and initially had bipartisan sponsorship now, and this amendment also has bipartisan sponsorship and support, would it make sense to retain this and work on it?
You're premature. We have a motion on the floor. Further discussion? C. Representative.
Parliamentary question. So if this is a split decision, then would it be open for a motion of retain afterwards?
It would indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Before we get to that point, before I ask the clerk to call the roll, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. Republicans will be in the office. You can stay here if you'd like, and we're recessed.
Mr. Chair, this meeting is going longer than your schedule. I have a question about my parking meter. If we take this 5-minute break now, can you extend it to 10? So that I can move my car?
Certainly. Yeah.
I really greatly
I'm happy to
appreciate that.
do that. We'll be back at between 25 past and 11:30.
You rock, thanks.
Thanks. Don't run. Don't run. back. The good news is we're going to be able to make lunch. The bad news is we are in recess until next Wednesday at 9 o'clock. We're in recess.